Jennifer Schuett's story is one that seems straight out of a horror movie, but unfortunately it is completely real. It is a story that speaks of human evil in its rawest form, but also of the incredible strength and resilience that a person can find within themselves to survive and ultimately triumph. Jennifer was born in 1982 in Dickinson, a small town in the state of Texas, United States. From a very young age, Jennifer showed herself to be a curious, intelligent, and lively child. However, like many children, she was afraid of the dark and didn't like sleeping alone. These nights of fear were eased thanks to her mother, Ellen, who was the only parental figure in her life. Ellen and Jennifer shared a special bond. They weren't just mother and daughter, but also best friends. Ellen had raised Jennifer alone, doing everything she could to give her a happy and safe life, despite the limitations they faced living in a small apartment in a not-so-safe neighborhood. Jennifer found comfort in sleeping next to her mother every night, which helped her overcome her fear of the dark. The little family of two, despite the difficulties, was happy in their small world. However, on the night of August 9, 1990, their lives changed forever. It was a warm summer night. Ellen, tired after a long day of work, asked Jennifer to sleep in her own room, something unusual since they usually shared a bed. Jennifer, obedient though a bit nervous about sleeping alone, went to her room. She took her favorite book and lay down to read, hoping that fatigue would overcome her and she would quickly fall asleep. Ellen, for her part, made sure everything was in order before going to bed, not knowing that this decision would mark the beginning of an unimaginable nightmare. At 2:30 in the morning, while Jennifer was sleeping soundly, an unknown man broke into her room through the window that faced the building's parking lot. This man, Dennis Earl Bradford, a sexual predator with a dark past, moved with stealth and determination. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. With cold, firm hands, he covered Jennifer's mouth and nose, preventing her from screaming, and whispered in her ear that he was an undercover police officer trying to calm her. But Jennifer, though terrified, instinctively knew something was very wrong. Dennis took her out of bed and led her to his vehicle, a rundown car he had parked near the building. He placed her in the passenger seat and promised that everything would be fine, that they were just going to wait until morning and her mother would come to pick her up. At that moment, Jennifer's fear turned into panic. The car's lights turned on and Dennis started the engine. He drove out of the city, heading towards an isolated area on the outskirts, a forest where no one could hear her. When they reached the forest, Dennis stopped the car and pulled out a knife, sharp and threatening, which he placed at Jennifer's throat. "Am I scaring you, little girl? Am I scaring you?" he whispered coldly in her ear. Jennifer was paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. Dennis then proceeded to sexually assault her in a brutal manner, something the 8-year-old girl could not fully comprehend but knew was horribly wrong. After the assault, Dennis wrapped his hands around Jennifer's neck and began to strangle her with all his might. Jennifer struggled to breathe, to hold on to life, but soon the darkness enveloped her as she lost consciousness. Believing he had killed the girl, Dennis, in one final act of cruelty, slashed her throat from ear to ear, ensuring she wouldn't survive. Convinced that Jennifer was dead, Dennis dragged her body to a nearby area where there was an anthill and left her there, covered in blood at the mercy of the ants and the elements. He then got into his car and drove away, leaving Jennifer to die alone in the darkness of the forest. Against all odds, Jennifer was not dead. The cut on her throat was deep and terrifying, but miraculously it had not damaged any major arteries. The pain was indescribable, but Jennifer's survival instinct was stronger. When she regained consciousness, her first reaction was to put her hand to her throat to try to stop the bleeding. She felt her life slipping away with each beat of her heart, but she refused to give up. For hours, Jennifer remained there, alone and in agony, as the ants bit her, preventing her from fully passing out. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of everyday life beginning to awaken with the dawn. Dogs barking, birds singing, children playing near the forest. She knew she had to do something to get attention, but she couldn't scream due to the severe wound in her throat. So, with the little strength she had left, she raised a hand in a gesture of desperation. Finally, on the morning of August 10, 1990, a group of children playing in the forest discovered her body. At first they thought she was dead, but as they got closer they saw she was still breathing. The children immediately ran to get help, and within minutes Jennifer was airlifted to the hospital in an emergency helicopter. Her condition was critical, and the doctors who received her couldn't believe that a child in such a state had survived for so long. Jennifer underwent emergency surgery to repair the damage to her throat. The doctors managed to stabilize her, but warned Ellen that her daughter might never speak again due to the severity of the injuries to her vocal cords. Despite the odds, Jennifer clung to life with fierce determination. When she regained consciousness after surgery, she was terrified and distrustful of everyone, especially men. Her traumatic experience had left an indelible mark on her soul, but it had also awakened in her an insatiable desire for justice. Unable to speak, Jennifer began communicating with the detectives through written notes. With astonishing clarity, she recounted the events of that night and provided crucial details about her attacker. She wrote that her kidnapper had told her he was a police officer named Dennis and described the car he had taken her in with remarkable accuracy, including the dents and cigarette marks she had seen inside. The detectives worked tirelessly to follow the leads provided by Jennifer, but despite their efforts, the case went cold. For nearly 20 years, Jennifer's attacker remained free while she tried to move on with her life. Jennifer grew up, finished school, and tried to lead a normal life, though the trauma of that night continued to haunt her. She never stopped thinking about Dennis Earl Bradford, the man who had tried to take her life, and she wished with all her heart that justice would one day prevail. In 2008, when Jennifer was already 26 years old, her case was reopened by a new detective named Tim Cromie. Cromie was a dedicated man, passionate about solving cases no matter how long they had gone unanswered. Upon reviewing Jennifer's file, he was struck by the bravery and determination she had shown in 1990 by providing so many details about her attacker, despite the devastating circumstances. Cromie decided to use new DNA technologies that weren't available in the 1990s. He sent the DNA samples collected from the crime scene to be reanalyzed using the most advanced techniques of the time. This process took many months, but in October of 2009, the effort paid off. There was a match in the National Criminal Database. The DNA matched Dennis Earl Bradford, a man who had been convicted of another sexual assault in 1996. Bradford had been arrested in Hot Springs, Arkansas for kidnapping a woman at knife point, dragging her into the woods and raping her. He had threatened to kill her but ultimately let her go. He was convicted of kidnapping and spent several years in prison, during which his DNA was entered into the national database. After being released in 2000, he had moved to Little Rock, where he remarried and began working as a welder. When Detective Tim Cromie received confirmation that the DNA found on Jennifer's clothing matched Dennis Earl Bradford's, he felt a mix of relief and determination. Finally, after nearly 2 decades, they had the man who had done so much harm to an innocent child. However, Cromie knew the work was far from over. He needed to make sure Bradford was brought to justice. To further confirm Bradford's identity as Jennifer's attacker, Cromie and his team requested a copy of Bradford's driver's license from 1990. When the image arrived, it was clear they were on the right track. The composite sketch Jennifer had helped create when she was just 8 years old was eerily similar to Bradford's license photo. The details Jennifer had provided, even after suffering such severe trauma, were so accurate that they seemed to have been drawn directly from Bradford's image. With this new evidence in hand, Cromie and his team moved quickly to obtain an arrest warrant. They knew they couldn't let Bradford escape once again. On October 29, 2009, nearly 20 years after the attack, Dickinson police, along with FBI agents, arrested Dennis Earl Bradford at his home in Little Rock, Arkansas. During the interrogation, Dennis Earl Bradford was initially reluctant to talk. However, when the detectives presented the evidence, including the DNA match and Jennifer's old description, Bradford began to break down. The memories of that August night in 1990, which he had likely tried to bury for years, began to resurface. "I was a sick and twisted man," Bradford confessed through tears. He admitted that not a single day went by without thinking about that little girl, referring to Jennifer, and that he deeply regretted what he had done. He described the attack in chilling detail, explaining how he had kidnapped Jennifer, taken her to the woods, and left her for dead. However, what surprised the detectives most was Bradford's reaction when they informed him that Jennifer was still alive. When he heard that the little girl he had tried to murder had survived, and had lived all these years with the memory of his attack, Bradford broke down in uncontrollable sobs. "Thank God she's alive," "You have no idea how much I've prayed for that," he said between tears. Despite his apparent remorse, Bradford was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and attempted capital murder. The news of Dennis Earl Bradford's capture was a moment of mixed emotions for Jennifer Schuett. After so many years of uncertainty, she finally knew who her attacker was, and he was in custody. Jennifer had waited for this moment for nearly 2 decades, but the reality of facing her assailant filled her with a combination of relief and anxiety. In a press conference shortly after the arrest, Jennifer, surrounded by the detectives who never gave up on her case, spoke bravely in front of the cameras. "I am not a victim but a survivor," she declared firmly. Her words resonated with everyone present, and her strength and determination were a testament to the power of human resilience. Jennifer made it clear that she was ready to see the judicial process through to the end, that she would not rest until Bradford paid for what he had done to her. Jennifer began preparing for the trial. She spent countless nights writing and rewriting her impact statement to ensure that nothing was left unsaid. She had 19 years of thoughts and emotions built up, and she wanted to make sure Bradford understood the damage he had caused not just to her, but to her family and the entire community of Dickinson. However, the trial Jennifer had waited so long for never took place. On May 10, 2010, just a few days before the scheduled trial date, Dennis Earl Bradford was found dead in his cell. He had hanged himself, ending his life before facing the justice that Jennifer and so many others had long awaited. The news of Bradford's suicide left Jennifer with a mix of frustration and relief. On one hand, she felt deprived of the opportunity to see her attacker face the consequences of his actions in a court of law. She had spent months preparing her statement and would now never have the chance to read it aloud in front of him. On the other hand, Bradford's death meant that he could never harm anyone again, and in that sense the cycle of violence had finally been broken. Even though Bradford did not face trial, Jennifer decided to close this chapter of her life in a way that would bring her peace. She traveled to Bradford's gravesite and, standing in front of his tombstone, read the statement she had prepared for the trial. "Dennis Bradford, I waited 19 years, 2 months, and 3 days to know your last name and to see you caught. You chose the wrong 8-year-old 45.5-pound girl to try to murder, because for 19 years I've thought about you every day and helped to search for you. In my heart, I knew you were out there alive, either in prison or living a lie. And now, I know that listening to my heart all these years and never giving up on finding you, I was right." With the closure of this chapter, Jennifer Schuett was finally able to begin truly healing. She formed her own family with her husband Jonathan, and together they had 2 children, something doctors had said might not be possible due to the internal injuries Jennifer had suffered during the attack. For Jennifer, having her own family was the culmination of her dreams and a symbol of her ability to overcome any obstacle. Jennifer also decided to use her experience to help others. She became an advocate for victims of violent crimes, sharing her story in schools, at conferences, and in the media, hoping to inspire others who had gone through similar situations. Her message was clear: never lose hope and never stop fighting for justice, no matter how long it takes or how difficult it may be. I hope my case serves as a reminder to all victims of violent crimes to never lose hope in seeking justice, no matter how long it takes or how hard it is. With determination and using your voice to speak out, you are capable of anything, Jennifer said in one of her many public appearances. Her words resonated deeply with everyone who heard them, and her story remains a powerful testament to the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. Despite the physical and emotional scars she will carry with her forever, Jennifer Schuett has refused to be defined by what happened to her. Instead, she has used her experience to empower herself and others, demonstrating that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. Located in the center of the United States is a small town called Hartford in Wisconsin. In the center of town, they have the largest automobile museum in all of Wisconsin. They also have a bowling alley called Dave's Lanes, which sells cheap beer and the best frozen pizza in town. Around the corner from the museum and Dave's Lanes, there are 2 other places that are very popular among locals. One is called Scoop Devil, a 1950s-themed ice cream parlor that specializes in raspberry sundaes, and the other popular place is called The Mine Shaft, a large family restaurant that offers comfort food and arcade games. On warmer days, you can find Hartford residents on the numerous walking trails in Woodlawn and Willowbrook, two large, well-maintained parks just outside the downtown area. And on practically any day, whether warm or cold, you can find Hartford residents crowding the Shower Arts Center, a local theater where the local theater company presents its plays. But none of these attractions is the reason why anyone knows Hartford, Wisconsin. The reason we know Hartford, Wisconsin, is because of Jessie Blodgett. Jessie Blodgett was a miracle. She was born on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia in 1994, to her loving parents Buck and Joy Blodgett. Buck and Joy for a long time couldn't have children. In fact, they were coming to terms with the reality that they wouldn't be able to have biological children when Joy discovered she was pregnant. The couple couldn't believe it. It was like the most incredible thing either of them had ever experienced. Joy would give birth to Jessie at home, without medication, without doctors, just Buck, her mother, and a midwife. And when little Jessie poked her head into the world for the first time, Buck and Joy instantly fell in love with her. Shortly after Jessie's birth, the Blodgett family would leave Atlanta, Georgia, and move to Hartford, Wisconsin. And it was there, in their modest two-story home about a 5-minute drive from downtown, that Jessie would grow up. And it was also inside that modest two-story house that many years later, Jessie would come face to face with a monster. Jessie was always someone other kids looked up to. She was a brilliant musician who could sing, play the piano, and play the violin. One of her close childhood friends, a girl named Jacqueline Knights, said that every time she went to Jessie's house, she had to shout at the top of her lungs to get her attention because Jessie was always playing the piano. But Jessie's musical talents weren't the only reason people were drawn to her. From a young age, Jessie was outraged by any form of bullying or injustice, and she quickly developed a very strong moral compass. She became a fierce advocate for animal rights, environmentalism, sustainability, social justice, and ultimately, ending violence against women. When she graduated from high school in 2012, Jessie had become very popular among her peers, as well as with teachers and parents. Jessie came across as someone wise beyond her years. Jessie always talked about wanting to change the world, and after high school she more or less figured out how she would do it. She decided she would study to become a choir director at a college or high school because, through that role, she could teach and guide over 100 young people every year. So in the fall of 2012, Jessie left Hartford and went to the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, about an hour southeast of Hartford, where she enrolled in their music education program. During that first year in college, Jessie did so well in the program that she was offered a talent scholarship for the following year. After finishing her incredibly successful first year in college, Jessie returned to Hartford, Wisconsin, to live with her parents for the summer. Unlike other college students who returned home for the summer, Jessie didn't treat this break as if it were a vacation. Instead, she decided to dive straight into her music education career. As soon as she got home, she started her own business teaching singing, piano, and violin to children in Hartford, and within weeks, she had secured more than 25 students. When Jessie wasn't teaching that summer, she was often writing original music with her friend Dan Bartelt, who was also a talented local musician. Or, when she wasn't doing that, she was rehearsing at the Shower Arts Center, where that summer she had auditioned and landed a lead role in the summer musical Fiddler on the Roof. Jessie was the fiddler and was very excited about it. The musical premiered to a packed house on Friday, July 12th at 7:30 p.m. And Jessie and the rest of her cast were incredible. Then the next night, Saturday, July 13th, they had another great performance at 7:30 p.m. And on Sunday, July 14th, they had a matinee at 2 p.m. After that show, Jessie and the rest of her castmates headed to another cast member's house who had a pool, and they had a big pool party to celebrate the end of their first opening weekend. During this party, Jessie spent half her time sitting around the pool with her castmates, and the other half petting llamas that were in a nearby field. Jessie finally left the party and returned to her parents' house shortly after midnight. When she entered the house, her mother Joy was still awake. When Joy heard her daughter, she came out to the front of the house and was about to ask Jessie how the party was when she immediately noticed something was wrong with Jessie. She seemed upset about something, so Joy asked if she was okay. Jessie seemed like she was about to begin giving a long explanation about why she was feeling the way she was, but ultimately stopped, and in a tone that was less upset and more just irritated, she said to her mother, "The guys in the cast, there are 2 older men who were flirting with me. And they were my friends, and I felt like they crossed the line. It was just uncomfortable." Joy began asking her some follow-up questions to better understand what had happened, But it soon became clear that it wasn't anything too serious. They quickly said goodnight to each other and retired to their rooms to go to sleep. The next morning, Buck and Joy got up fairly early, around 7 a.m., and Jessie stayed in bed because her only commitment that day was a lesson she was giving to one of her students around noon, and the student was coming to the house for that lesson. So her parents knew she was sleeping. Buck left the house before Joy, probably around 7 or 7:30, and at 8 a.m., Joy, just before leaving the house, brought some clean clothes up to Jessie's room. She opened Jessie's bedroom door, entered, and saw that Jessie was still asleep. Joy left the clothes and considered waking her daughter up to say good morning, but thought to herself that Jessie rarely had the chance to sleep in. She always had something going on, so she decided to let her sleep. She quietly left the room, closed the door, and went to work. Around noon, Joy left the office and returned home for her lunch break. When she entered her house, she expected to see Jessie awake, because Jessie had one of her students arriving at any moment, but when she entered, the house was silent. Jessie wasn't downstairs, apparently wasn't awake, and Joy had seen her car in the driveway, so she knew she hadn't left. So, a little annoyed, Joy walked to the bottom of the stairs and shouted upstairs for Jessie to wake up, saying, "Hey, your student is going to be here any minute." Then Joy stepped away from the bottom of the stairs and walked to the kitchen to fix herself something to eat. After a while, as she was finishing up her lunch, Joy heard a knock on the front door. At this point, Joy was really annoyed because Jessie still hadn't made any noise, hadn't come downstairs. So Joy went to the front door, opened it, and sure enough, it was Jessie's student. She asked the student to come in and wait a minute, and then Joy quickly went upstairs, went straight to Jessie's bedroom, opened the door, and Jessie was still in bed. So Joy rushed over to her to wake her up. But as soon as she was standing right above the bed, right over her daughter, and had a clear view of her daughter's face, she froze. Moments later, she called 911. "Oh my God, oh my God. 911, what's your emergency? My daughter is blue. I went to wake her up. I just got home for lunch and she's not waking up." She's like, "Oh my God, okay, hold on 2 seconds, okay? Okay, is she breathing? I don't think so. No, her pants are wet. It looks like strangulation marks. That's what it looks like. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on." Joy gently pulled her daughter out of bed and laid her on the floor. She put a pillow under her head and then began doing chest compressions to try to save her daughter's life. But it was already too late. When the police and paramedics arrived moments later, they entered the bedroom and quickly determined that Jessie had passed away. When the police examined Jessie's body, they also saw the marks on her neck that her mother had mentioned in the 911 call, as well as marks on her left wrist and also on her ankles. As a result of these findings, the police on the scene quickly concluded that this was not a natural death. It was not a suicide, it was a homicide. And as delicately as possible, the police led Joy out of her daughter's bedroom and down to the first floor because at that point, her daughter's bedroom was a crime scene, and they needed to keep it intact so they could find evidence that might help them figure out who did this. Once downstairs, Joy was joined by her husband Buck, who had also just arrived home, and both of them, devastated, couldn't comprehend what had happened. Their beautiful baby, their only daughter, was now suddenly gone, and nothing made sense. During the search of Jessie's bedroom and the Blodgett house in general, the police couldn't find any rope or ligatures that could have been used to strangle Jessie to death. The police also noted that there were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house, and it appeared that nothing had been stolen from the house. So quickly, the lead detective of the Hartford police, named Richard Thickens, began operating under the assumption that the killer knew Jessie and had deliberately targeted her. They knew where she was in the house. They knew how to get into the house. They went straight to her, killed her, and then left. When Detective Thickens spoke with Buck and Joy just a few hours after they had discovered their daughter dead, he asked them if they had any idea who would want to harm their daughter. At first, the parents said no, they didn't know anyone, but after digging a little deeper, Buck mentioned, "Well, there were some tree trimmers recently who were cutting branches just outside Jessie's bedroom window, so maybe they looked in and saw a teenage girl who was all alone and came in and attacked her." Then Buck also said that besides teaching music that summer, Jessie had taken on a few hours working at a roadside restaurant and had recently had a conflict with one of her coworkers who began behaving very inappropriately with her. Basically, this coworker would walk past Jessie and intentionally brush up against her, invading her personal space, and this coworker knew that Jessie was really upset and had already told her family about it. So maybe this coworker was angry and seeking revenge. Additionally, Joy pointed out to the detective that the night before, when Jessie came home, she seemed really upset about something. She had said it was about two men who, were flirting with her at the party and made her feel uncomfortable. But Joy and Jessie didn't really get into details, so there was something that was clearly bothering her the night she was murdered. After this discussion, Detective Thickens went out looking for those tree trimmers. He also tracked down the co-worker at the restaurant and found that both had solid alibis and were ruled out as suspects. As for the two older men, the cast members from the pool party who made Jessie uncomfortable, Detective Thickens found them and quickly ruled one of them out, but couldn't rule out the other. His name was Randy Talley. When Detective Thickens spoke with Randy on July 15th, the day Jessie was found, Randy denied having anything to do with Jessie's death. When Detective Thickens asked him, where were you last night after the cast party? Where did you go? And where were you this morning? Randy told him that after the party he went back to his apartment, and that's where he had been the whole time up until that moment. When Detective Thickens asked if there was anyone who could corroborate his story, Randy said no. He was alone in his apartment the entire time. Shortly after speaking with Randy, the police were still searching for evidence in Jessie's bedroom and discovered her journal. The last entry in that journal only made Randy seem more suspicious. Despite downplaying the incident Jessie had with these two older men from the cast at the pool party, after Jessie briefly spoke with her mother when she got back from the party, she went up to her room and then wrote this last entry in her journal. In it, she talks about being really upset by what these two men had done to her. She said these two men were corrupting her, and they were taking what should be a platonic love and perverting it into a competition. Her final line seemed to indicate that she might be anticipating some sort of future confrontation with these two men. The line said, "I am not helpless. I will recognize problems and face them without fear. God is with me." Between Randy's lack of an alibi and Jessie's ominous final message, which seemed to be talking about Randy, Randy quickly became the prime suspect in this murder investigation. But Randy's phone records indicated that he had no interaction, no calls or texts, with Jessie before her death. And around the time of the morning of July 15th, when Jessie would have been murdered, Randy's phone was at his apartment far from Jessie's house. So while this didn't definitively mean Randy couldn't have killed Jessie because he could have left his phone at his apartment when he carried out the attack, what it did mean is that there was no real evidence to support the idea that Randy killed Jessie. Therefore, the Hartford police had to go back to the drawing board and try to find new leads to continue investigating. And on July 16th, just 24 hours after Jessie was found, the police got a big lead. 3 days before Jessie was murdered, a young woman around the same age as Jessie, named Melissa Richards, decided to take her dog for a walk in a park in Richfield, Wisconsin, which is a small town about 10 kilometers southeast of Hartford. When Melissa parked her car in the dirt lot that connected to the trail she planned to walk, she noticed that there was only one other car parked in that lot, and it was immediately to her left with its nose pointing out of the entrance. It was a blue minivan. As she drove by, she looked over at the vehicle and noticed the driver had their legs sticking out of the driver's side window, as if they were lying across the front seats. This didn't bother Melissa too much, but she definitely took note of this person in this van. So she drove past the blue minivan to her left, crossed the entire dirt lot to the other side, parked her car, got out, took her little dog Remy out of the car, and then walked away from the parking lot and headed down the trail into the woods. The trail she was walking was basically a big loop that ended at the entrance of the dirt lot. So when she finished her walk, she would be walking directly through the entire parking lot, meaning she would be walking on foot right in front of that blue minivan if it was still there when she finished. So Melissa did a 30-minute loop, got to the end, and reached the entrance to the parking lot. And she saw that the blue minivan was still parked where it was, except now the driver didn't have their legs sticking out of the window. Now she couldn't see if there was anyone in the van at all. So Melissa, again, wasn't thinking much of this. It crossed her mind, but she wasn't uneasy about this van. So she unclipped Remy's leash and Remy began running toward the car. Melissa took out her key fob and popped the trunk. Remy ran, jumped into the car, and Melissa kept walking toward her vehicle. When Melissa walked far enough to pass the blue minivan, she turned to look at it and saw the person who had been sticking their legs out the window. The driver was now sitting in the passenger seat of the blue minivan. The door was open, and this person was sitting there staring at her. So Melissa made quick eye contact with this person and immediately looked away. She didn't want to be rude and just kept walking toward her vehicle. But again, she wasn't worried about what was going on with this van. She was just aware of this person in this van. But after looking away, she heard the sound of someone running toward her from behind. So, she quickly turned her head and saw the same person who had been sitting in the passenger seat. The driver of this van was running toward her, and as soon as she turned to face this person, they stopped completely and just stared at her. They were only about 3 meters away, and Melissa reflexively said, "Oh, you scared me." Then Melissa just turned her back on this person and continued walking toward her vehicle. After taking just a few steps, once again, she heard the sound of this person behind her starting to run at her. Immediately, she turned her head again, and again, this person abruptly stopped as soon as Melissa looked at them. But now, Melissa knew something was wrong, and worst of all, she looked down and saw that in this person's right hand, next to their hip, was a knife. A second later, this person charged at Melissa, knocked her to the ground. Melissa fell face down, and she was pinned down on her stomach. This person tried to stab Melissa, but Melissa fought back with all her strength. She rolled over and grabbed the blade of the knife, wrestled with her attacker, and managed to wrench the knife away from them. Then she put it under her body and covered it with all her weight. The attacker was so shocked by what had happened that they paused for a second before bending down and trying to pull the knife out from under Melissa, but Melissa wouldn't let go of it. Eventually, the attacker just sat on her back and said, "Can I go?" And Melissa said no. But at that exact moment, the attacker jumped up and began running back toward the blue minivan. Melissa didn't wait to see what they were going to do. She jumped up, still holding the knife, her hands completely shredded, ran to her car, jumped inside, threw the bloody knife onto the passenger seat floor after making sure Remy was in the car with her, shut the trunk, locked the doors, and then turned around and saw her attacker in the van, pulling out of the lot and driving away. So Melissa felt relieved, but also just wanted to get out of there. She was completely alone. So she started her car and drove to the hospital. After getting 15 stitches to repair the 3 very deep cuts on her hands, Melissa was transferred to a recovery room where a man named Joel Clausing, who was a detective with the Washington County Sheriff's Department, came into the room and took Melissa's statement. Now, Melissa was very shaken by what had just happened. She had no idea who this person was or why they attacked her. But despite being shaken, Melissa had the most incredible memory of the event. She knew exactly what her attacker looked like, all the little details, and she knew everything about the vehicle, including the fact that she knew it was a Dodge Caravan minivan. She knew the exact type of car and guessed it was probably from the years 2000 to 2002. So, Melissa gave this incredible statement, and Detective Clausing went back and had a composite sketch made of the attacker. Then, on that sheet showing the attacker, there was a description of the vehicle, its location, and some details about the case. So, Detective Clausing released this composite sketch and information to the media and distributed it around town, hoping that someone in the town knew who this person was, since the description was so good, and someone would come forward. On July 16th, the day after Jesse was murdered, an officer from the Washington County Sheriff's Department came forward and said, "Hey, I saw your flyer," and read the description Melissa gave about the type of vehicle this person was using. And I've seen that vehicle parked in that same exact spot in that park. It was there a couple of weeks ago. I saw it there. There was something strange about it. The driver was acting strangely, so I actually checked the license plates to see if there were any outstanding warrants or anything with this person. But after I ran the plates, nothing came up, so I more or less forgot about it. But now I've read this description, and I'm pretty convinced it's the exact same vehicle. So I can retrieve those plates I ran, and we can see who that vehicle belongs to, and maybe it matches. So the officer retrieved the information he had obtained from the plates of the van he had seen a few weeks earlier. And when they looked up the owner of that minivan, there was just no way it matched the description Melissa gave. It just couldn't be the same person. So briefly, Detective Clausing and the officer thought, okay, it was just a big coincidence that a very similar blue minivan was parked in the exact same spot a couple of weeks apart. But when Detective Clausing looked a little deeper into who owned that vehicle, he found out they had a relative who matched exactly with the description Melissa gave of her attacker. So, on the afternoon of July 16th, the day after Jesse was murdered, Detective Clausing tracked down the phone number of the relative who looked exactly like the attacker. He dialed that number on his cell phone and held the phone to his ear. At the same time, 16 kilometers to the northwest, Buck and Joy Blodgett were holding a vigil for their daughter at their home. So all of Jesse's close friends and family were there in the living room, sitting in a circle, crying together, grieving together, and also sharing their favorite memories of Jesse. While everyone was doing that, a phone started ringing within the circle, and the owner of that phone, 19-year-old Daniel Bartelt, who was a very close friend of Jesse's and who had spent much of that summer going over to the Blodgett house to make original music with Jesse, got up and quietly left the group. He then answered the phone, and it was Detective Clausing, asking Daniel to come down to the station to talk about Melissa Richards. Daniel went to the station that afternoon and was interviewed by Detective Clausing and another detective. Although they had brought Daniel in to talk to him about Melissa Richards, these detectives couldn't help but notice how odd it was that Daniel was at the house of a recently murdered young woman, where that case was unsolved, and now he was the suspect in another attack on another young woman that had happened just a few days earlier, and just a few kilometers away. So, as soon as Daniel sat down, Detective Clausing casually asked, "Hey, why were you at Jesse Blodgett's house when I called you?" And Daniel replied, "Well, you know, I'm really close to Jessie, so we were there as part of her vigil because she was killed yesterday." Then, the detective gradually shifted the conversation to Melissa Richards, and Daniel said he had nothing to do with that. But as they started asking him questions about Melissa, Detective Clausing and the other detective noticed that there were cuts on Daniel's hands, so they interrupted him and asked, "How did you get those cuts on your hands?" And Daniel quickly responded, "Well, you know, I got them at work. A screw was sticking out and it cut my hands. I move inventory in the back room of an engineering company. That's my job, and, you know, I just cut my hand at work." At that point, the police started asking very specific questions about exactly how he cut his hands and what exactly he did at his job. At some point, when it seemed like something wasn't adding up in his story about how he had injured himself, one of the detectives just said to Daniel, "If I called your employer, this engineering company, would they say that you, Daniel, currently work for them?" Daniel paused for a minute and then said, "No, I actually lost my job several weeks ago." So the detectives knew he had to be lying about how he had cut his hand because he had just told them he cut it at work recently, but he hadn't been employed recently. So Detective Clausing leaned in and said, "Daniel, so how did you really hurt your hand?" Daniel started talking about how he had cut it cooking, and Detective Clausing said, "Daniel, no one would lie about cutting their hand cooking. Why don't you tell us the truth?" Shockingly, Daniel did. After heavy pressure, he admitted that he had injured himself while attacking Melissa Richards. He told the detectives that after losing his job a few weeks earlier, he didn't want his parents to know he had lost the job, so he just kept getting up early and leaving the house, coming back later in the day, acting as if he had been at work all day when in reality all he was doing was driving around town and sometimes going to parks and just sitting in the parking lots of those parks. So, on July 12th, the day Melissa was attacked, that's exactly what Daniel was doing. He was pretending to be at work by sitting in that parking space in that dirt lot in Richfield, and at some point, he saw Melissa and decided he just wanted to attack her. He told the detectives that he had recently felt overwhelmed in college, so he had dropped out and then lost his job. Combined, he was feeling scared about life as he described it, and he wanted someone else to feel scared too. So that's why, he said, he attacked Melissa. But despite admitting to this violent, vicious crime against Melissa Richards, when asked if he had any connection to Jesse Blodgett's murder, he said, "Absolutely not. I love Jessie. I would never hurt her." But when Detective Clausing contacted Detective Thickens from the Hartford Police and told him they should consider Daniel a possible suspect in their murder case, it quickly became clear that Daniel was lying again. Daniel was raised in a good, loving family. He was extremely smart, a straight-A student, an incredible musician, and he was highly respected by his peers and even by his teachers and other instructors. I mean, this was a kid who had everything going for him. But something went wrong with Daniel, and no one knows exactly why. Shortly before attacking Melissa, Daniel became obsessed with murder, death, and homicide. His internet search history shows that he spent a lot of time searching for real murder videos online, known as snuff videos. He also spent a lot of time researching information about serial killers and mass murderers, and he was especially interested in anyone who killed lots of women. Finally, just before attacking Melissa, Daniel, according to his search history, discovered one particular snuff porn video. It was of a woman who was bound hand and foot, and after being assaulted, she was strangled. Daniel watched this video over and over again. On July 12th, while Daniel was pretending to be at work, he was sitting in his car, looked outside, and saw Melissa. She was all alone, and something clicked in his head where he decided he was going to recreate that disgusting snuff porn video with Melissa. So it's likely that Melissa was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Recovered in that dirt lot after the attack was some special very strong tape that Daniel had in his pockets during the attack. It just fell out, so it's believed he was going to use that tape to subdue Melissa and then kidnap her. But obviously Melissa fought back, and Daniel got scared and fled. 3 days later, on July 15th, it's believed that Daniel decided he wanted to try again. He wanted to act out that snuff porn video, but in real life. This time, he wasn't going to leave it up to chance with a random victim. He needed his victim to be completely defenseless, someone who wouldn't resist. And who better than Jesse Blodgett, a 19-year-old close friend who trusted him inherently and would easily let him into her house, into her bedroom? It didn't matter if she was completely alone because she felt safe around him. According to the testimony of an eyewitness who was driving through the Blodgett neighborhood on the morning Jesse was murdered, it's believed that Daniel arrived in the Blodgett driveway just minutes after Buck and Joy left for work. He pulled into the driveway knowing Jesse was alone. We don't know exactly what happened inside that house. We don't know if Jesse came down and opened the door or if she was still upstairs sleeping, but Daniel entered the house, and when he did, he was prepared for what he was going to do. He literally had a bag full of supplies, including that special strong tape, restraints, ropes, alcohol wipes, and zip ties. He went up to Jesse's bedroom, and once inside, we don't know if Jesse was awake or asleep at that point, but either way, Daniel jumped on her and immediately put a homemade gag in her mouth. He then wrapped that special tape around her head to ensure the gag stayed in place. Once she couldn't make any sound, he tied her wrists and ankles, hog-tied her, and then brutally assaulted her. After he was finished, he wrapped a rope around her neck and strangled her to death. After she died, Daniel tried to clean her body with alcohol wipes. Then he repositioned her on her bed, covering her with the sheets to give the appearance that she was still sleeping, hoping her parents would find her like that. Daniel then gathered all his murder supplies and put them back in his bag, except for one piece of that special tape that he accidentally left under Jesse's bed. He then left the Blodgett house and drove to Woodlawn Park, where he disposed of his supplies in one of the trash bins. The next day, during Jesse's vigil, Daniel attended, and according to those present, he was the person who spoke the most in that circle. Ultimately, Daniel was found guilty of Jesse Blodgett's murder, although he never admitted his guilt. During the sentencing phase, Buck Blodgett gave an incredibly eloquent and heartbreaking speech about what it meant to lose his only daughter. Toward the end of this speech, Buck turned to his right, away from the judge to whom he had been speaking, and looked directly at Daniel. Daniel returned his gaze, and Buck said, "Dan, I forgive you, as I have every day since I found out it was you." Then moments later, Buck also told Daniel, "Dan, not only do I forgive you, but I also love you." But when it was Daniel's turn to stand up and say something in his defense, he turned to Buck and Joy, looking them directly in the eyes, and told them he was innocent, that he had no answers for them because he didn't do it, and that his conscience was clear. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and as far as we know, he continues to deny having killed Jesse, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. In the days following Jesse's death, Buck Blodgett went into his daughter's room, lay on her bed, and staring up, tried to hold his breath for as long as he could. As he began to struggle to breathe, he started to imagine what his poor daughter must have felt in her final moments while she was being murdered, and it broke him. He thought to himself, "I wasn't there for my little girl when she needed me most." But instead of carrying that terrible burden for the rest of his life, Buck and his family decided they had to do something to honor their daughter's memory, and perhaps even change the world, something Jesse always talked about wanting to do. So Buck founded the Love is Greater Than Hate Project, an incredible charity whose mission is to end male violence against women and foster love over hate. Most of us have seen Jeepers Creepers from 2001, but I feel like many of you don't realize that the beginning of that movie is based on a true story, on a real situation that happened in 1990. Dennis Depew, 46 years old, murdered his wife Marilyn and hid her body, but the story is extremely strange. Although the director has never openly said so, it's quite obvious that this story is basically the start of Jeepers Creepers. So I wanted to come and see for myself the abandoned school and drive down South Prairie Road. This is where it all happened, on Easter Sunday in 1990. Ray and Marie Thornton were driving down this road, South Prairie Road, when a Chevy truck approached quickly from behind and then aggressively sped past them. That's when Marie Thornton said, referring to the license plate, "GZ, that guy's in a hurry." They laughed about it and continued down the road. Just a few miles ahead, they came across the abandoned school, and there they saw that truck again. They saw a man who seemed to be holding a blanket or a sheet that was covered in blood, or at least appeared red. At that moment, they didn't know what it was. And here it is, the actual school, built in 1908. This is the place where Ray and Marie Thornton drove by and saw that same vehicle and that man. Their car, I think, was parked right here. I believe there was a large tank here and he was somewhere around here. They saw him with a blanket or a sheet, and it was at that moment that Marie said, "What does that man have? A sheet soaked in blood or something like that?" They decided they weren't going to stay there and left. They realized they should probably get out of that area. So they kept driving, sped up a bit, and a few miles ahead, that same Chevy truck was right behind them, tailgating them. Now they were scared, wondering what that guy was doing. This went on for a few miles until the Thorntons turned onto another road. They could see in their rearview mirror that the vehicle had stopped at the intersection and was on the side of the road. And they said, "You know what? We should turn around." A very brave couple, the Thorntons. "We should turn around and get a description of this vehicle, get the license plate, because he's up to something suspicious. We don't know what that whole thing with the blanket he was trying to bury was about." They turned around, went back to the intersection, the truck was still there, and that man was changing his license plates. The passenger door was open and Marie Thornton could see it was covered in blood. They decided to get out of there immediately. They headed back towards the school, wanting to see what that man was doing. They returned and got back to the school. Incredibly, they got out of the car, feeling the need to see what that man was hiding, what he was doing, what that blanket or sheet was. So they got out of their car and walked until they found a small animal hole. And that's where they found a blanket soaked in blood. He was trying to stuff it into the hole without success. It's a big mistake to think he did anything inside the school. He didn't hide anything in the school. No body was found in the school. I think he just stopped there to try to hide that bloody blanket, or maybe, if he found a good spot, to hide Marilyn. At that point, they left and went to the police. Now this happened right after the situation at the Depew house. Dennis and Marilyn Depew had been married for many years, I believe 18 years. They had divorced, but he had specific visitation rights. Again, it was Easter Sunday. He went to pick up the kids, but they didn't want to go with him and he got into an argument with Marilyn. She fell, he pushed her, or she fell down the stairs and was seriously injured. He basically dragged her out of the house, telling the kids they were going to the hospital. Well, they never went to the hospital, but one of the kids ran out of the house at that moment and went to call the police. So the police received 2 separate calls, probably not realizing at that time that they were about the same person. What happened was that a day later, they were looking for Dennis. He had disappeared. The next day, not far from here, basically between this school and where his house used to be, a road worker found Marilyn Depew's body on the side of the road. They found her with a gunshot wound to the back of her head, most likely in the truck, which would explain why it was so bloody. Once all this happened, for some time, family and friends started receiving letters from Dennis, who was on the run and hiding. Strange letters with biblical inscriptions, basically justifying why he had killed Marilyn, saying that she was turning the family against him, that he had lost everything. Dennis was missing for a year, and that's when Unsolved Mysteries took the case. They actually aired it, I believe, in Season 3, Episode 20. I think. I'll put it down below, maybe I'll add a link because it's on YouTube. They did a story on this. They showed this story on their show, and as they say, he saw it on TV. By then, he was living a completely different life, under the alias Hank Queen, and was living with a girlfriend in Texas, I think in Dallas, Texas. He knew he had to get out of there, so he left that night, and right at that moment, his girlfriend's relatives were watching the show, called the police, and they found him that night trying to leave the area. There was a long chase. He was shooting at them. He actually went through 2 police blockades and ended up shooting himself, I believe in Mississippi, in the head, in the same vehicle in that truck where he shot Marilyn. This is Dennis's final resting place here with his family. This isn't very far from where the school is, just across the border in Indiana. And I think, yes, these are his mother and father, and I don't know who these people are, possibly sisters. His father actually lived until 2005, his mother until 1997, and of course 1991 for Dennis, when he took his own life. Clearly flowers and plants are in this family, so they probably still have family in the area. I mean, everyone has family: serial killers, bank robbers, murderers. They all have family. Marilyn, I believe, was tired of being controlled. There were a lot of things happening under the surface, there were many arguments, and they just weren't getting along, and she wanted a divorce, and reportedly, he didn't want a divorce. And so these things happen sometimes. Yes, that's what I imagined, from 1990. Not so long ago that it's completely... Yes. How often are graves unmarked? It happens, really. Yes, well, at least I know I'm not crazy then. Anyway, I wanted to come to Oakland Hills Cemetery here to pay my respects to Marilyn. But I searched and visited the office several times, and eventually someone came out to try to locate her grave. We couldn't find it, and she's pretty sure it's an unmarked grave. Most likely her family couldn't afford, or maybe didn't want, any type of plot or anything for her, no headstone or memorial stone or anything like that. But it's pretty much right in this spot here. And that's the story of Dennis Depew, the murder of Marilyn Depew, and the inspiration, at least for the beginning, of Jeepers Creepers. A crazy story at Marilyn's expense, of course, and wherever she is, I hope she's resting in peace. The date was December 31st, 2021. The world was preparing to celebrate the new year with new hopes and excitement. For Janvi Kukreja, a 19-year-old living in Mumbai, this date was even more special because it was her father's birthday. Additionally, on the night of December 31st, some of Janvi's closest friends had organized a New Year's Eve party. Everything seemed to be going well, but suddenly in the early morning of New Year's Day, around 5 o'clock, Janvi's family received a phone call that changed everything. At the party, a heartbreaking event involving Janvi occurred. The story you are about to hear will chill you to the bone. Although this story is about Janvi, by learning about it, we might prevent our own sisters or daughters from becoming the next Janvi. If you know a little about Janvi Kukreja, you probably only know the story that the press told or showed you. But here, in addition to the version told by the press, we will also share the truth revealed by Janvi's mother and some friends who were present at the party. So make sure to stay until the end of this video. This is the story of Janvi Kukreja, who lived in the Car area of Mumbai. As mentioned at the beginning, December 31st was Janvi's father's birthday, and on this occasion, Janvi organized a small party at home with some childhood friends and neighbors. Among the attendees were her two closest friends, Shri Jagtap and Disha Salian. The birthday celebration at home, which included cutting a cake, took place around 7 in the evening. Janvi had another friend, Yash Ahuja, who lived in the Bhagwati Heights building in Car. Yash had organized a New Year's Eve party at his building, to which Janvi, Shri Jagtap and Disha Salian, along with 13 other friends, were invited. According to the plan, the party was supposed to start at 9 o'clock in the evening and last until 11. Therefore, after cutting the cake at 7, Janvi headed to Yash Ahuja's party with her two friends. But when they arrived, they found out that for some reason the party time had been changed to 11 o'clock at night. So Janvi returned home. After resting a bit at home, Janvi went out again with her friends around 11 o'clock for the party. You might be wondering why Janvi went to the party so late. It's important to note that only 15 people were supposed to attend the party, 5 of whom lived in the same building as Janvi. Moreover, Shri Jagtap and Disha Salian had been friends with Janvi for between 12 and 15 years. These were childhood friends, and Janvi's parents knew them very well. Additionally, in Mumbai, late-night parties on December 31st are not unusual, so Janvi went to the party with her friends and began to enjoy it. Although the party was supposed to end at 1 o'clock in the morning, it went on a little longer, and Janvi did not return home that night. However, around 1:30 her father called her, but the phone was busy. He then called her again at 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning, but Janvi did not answer. Since Janvi was with childhood friends at the party, her parents were not too worried about not receiving a response, thinking that, as on previous occasions, Janvi might stay over at a friend's house because it was late. The date changed to January 1st, 2022. It was 5 o'clock in the morning when Janvi's father, Prakash Kukreja, received a phone call. He thought someone was calling to wish him a happy new year, but when he answered, the ground fell out from under him. He was told that Janvi had been in an accident. Minutes later, Disha Salian's father, Samir Salian, also called Janvi's father to inform him that the kids had been in an accident and that he needed to go to the police station quickly. Samir also mentioned that Disha was at Hinduja Hospital, while Janvi was at Baba Hospital. Janvi's father asked why, if both kids had been in the same accident, they were in different hospitals, and why he was being called to the police station instead of the hospital. To this, Disha's father insisted that he go to the police station for more information. Upon hearing this, Janvi's father rushed to the car police station, where he received heartbreaking news. His daughter, Janvi, had died. She was found dead on the ground floor of the Bhagwati Heights building, where the party had taken place the night before. Upon hearing the news, Janvi's mother, Nidhi Prakash Kukreja, also rushed to the hospital where Janvi's body was being kept. After receiving the news of her death, some formalities were completed, and then an autopsy was conducted, after which the body was handed over to the family for the funeral. The night before, all the friends who attended the party were very close to Janvi. Some of them were even neighbors and childhood friends. However, after Janvi's death, none of those friends went to her house, not even to console her parents as neighbors. This led Janvi's family to suspect that her death was not natural, but rather the result of a large conspiracy to end Janvi's life. On the other hand, the police also considered it an unnatural death and began investigating the case. During the investigation, several shocking details emerged. The police began by recording statements from the people who were at the party. Among them was Yash Ahuja, who told the police that the party was taking place on the rooftop of the 7th floor of the Bhagwati Heights building. According to Yash, Shri Jagtap was kissing Janvi while Disha was lying on a nearby mattress. Shortly afterward, Shri and Disha started behaving intimately, which enraged Janvi and sparked an argument among the three of them. It was later discovered that Janvi made a phone call to her friend Prachi Nahar around 1:40 in the morning, during which Janvi recounted what had happened at the party. Prachi informed the police that Janvi was unhappy with Shri's behavior and said she didn't want to lose either of her two friends. This was the last time Janvi spoke to anyone on the phone. At approximately 2:20, when some friends at the party went downstairs to leave, they saw Janvi lying on the ground floor. They immediately called the police. After recording statements from everyone present at the party, the police began investigating the crime scene and found some important evidence. They found yellow bracelets that Janvi had been wearing on the stairs of the 5th floor, a sandal on the 4th floor, another on Janvi's foot on the ground floor, an earring on the 3rd floor, and a hairband on the 2nd floor. They also found bloodstains on the 3rd floor and hair samples on the staircase railing on the 2nd floor. DNA tests revealed that the blood and hair belonged to Janvi. The police also found the shirt that Shri Jagtap had worn that night, which had bloodstains matching Janvi's. Days later, the autopsy report arrived, revealing that Janvi had 48 deep wounds on her body. Her skull was fractured, and other parts of her body also showed fractures. According to the report, her head had been violently struck against a railing. Based on the statements and evidence gathered, the police filed murder charges against Shri Jagtap and Disha Salian, and both were arrested. This case gained a lot of media attention, leading the police to complete their investigation quickly and file a 600-page charge sheet in April. Janvi's murder was attributed to her childhood friends, Shri Jagtap and Disha Salian. According to the police, the reason behind the murder was a love triangle. Janvi and Shri were supposedly in love, but Shri also had a secret relationship with Disha. During the party, Janvi saw Shri behaving intimately with Disha, which enraged her and they began to fight. This fight started on the 7th floor and escalated to the stairwell. Finally, on the 2nd floor, Shri and Disha assaulted Janvi, threw her to the ground from the 2nd floor, and she died instantly. After the friends saw Janvi's body, they first called Shri, as they knew he was her boyfriend. However, Shri initially did not respond, and when he finally did, he reacted indifferently upon hearing about Janvi's death. When the police questioned Shri and Disha, both denied committing the murder and claimed they didn't remember anything that happened that night, supposedly due to their intoxicated state. Curiously, a year after the incident, they still claim not to remember anything. Additionally, the police have not found any eyewitnesses who saw the murder. Although some witnesses saw the three of them fighting, there is no direct evidence to incriminate them. Despite the lack of eyewitnesses, The police have forensic and circumstantial evidence that allows them to assert that Sri Jagtap and Disha Salian are responsible for the murder of Janvi Kukreja. So far, neither of the accused has been convicted, and the trial is ongoing. In July 2022, the main accused, Sri Jagtap and Disha Salian, applied for bail, but the court, considering the circumstantial evidence to be quite strong, denied the request, so both remain in prison. The version of the story we've told you so far is based on the statements of the friends present at the party. However, now we will share the version of Janvi's mother, who has a different perspective. According to her, although the police and Janvi's friends claim that she and Sri were in love, Janvi's mother maintains that they were just friends and that there was no romantic relationship between them. She believes that Janvi was murdered for some other reason that the accused are trying to hide. Since the case is still in court, we cannot make a definitive statement about who is guilty. The truth will come to light with time. Meanwhile, what do you think?